Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2013. In this section we're going to look at working with workbooks. Some of the features that are particularly important when you have more than one workbook open at a time, the sort of things you can do between workbooks and to compare workbooks, and then finally we're going to look at the sort of information you may want to store with your workbook, which is not actually part of the data in the workbook itself, so it's more information about the workbook. So the first thing I'm going to do is to open two of the workbooks that we've been working with. So first of all, let's get the refurb estimation workbook opened again. I'll go back to the room sizes page, and then also from the list of recent workbooks we'll go for one of these sample files. Now the first thing to notice is that when you do this in Excel 2013, unlike earlier versions of Excel, you actually finish up with two windows. Each of the workbooks occupies its own window in Excel 2013. Now I should point out that there is absolutely no reason why you shouldn't have two or three or however many workbooks open that you want in Excel 2013. You will of course be restricted by the memory in your computer, but that may not necessarily restrict you very much. I should also point out, and this is particularly relevant if you've used Excel before, if you go to the View menu, one of the options on the View menu, the equivalent now is Switch Windows, and this says quickly switch to another open Excel window. Now if I click on the drop down there, it lists the two workbooks in this case that I have open. There may well be more than two will be listed here, and one easy way of switching between them is just to select from the list that you see here. So ticked is the one that currently has the focus. That's the mileage expenses form that you worked on earlier on. Let's switch back to the refurb one. It's as simple as that, and then conversely to get back there again, same approach. Now depending on which operating system you're using, you may also know how to switch between windows, for instance using the sort of flipping approach, using the Alt and Tab keys on your keyboard. I'm not going to go into that now, but if you have a method like that, then that's perfectly usable as well. You'll also see, usually on the taskbar on a PC, that if you hover over the Excel icon, it will show you the two or more windows for the two or more workbooks that you have open at the time. So there are various ways of switching between those windows, and having each workbook within a window makes it a lot easier to work on one workbook without being unduly influenced by the other workbook or having the danger of upsetting the other workbook. Now, apart from the ability to switch between the workbooks, there are various other things that we can do as well. On the View tab, in the Window group, you've already seen the Switch Windows button here. To the left of that, there's three little buttons on top of each other. If you look at the top one, it is a button to view side by side, and where you have more than one workbook open, you can actually view side by side. Now unfortunately, because of the way this course has been recorded, I can't actually demonstrate this to you. Basically, if you enable the viewing side by side and then go to the bottom button, you can then reset the view of the, say, two workbooks side by side so that they have an equal share of the screen each. This can be particularly useful when you're doing a direct comparison either between two workbooks that should be the same, or, and this is a very important point, where you are using data from one workbook in another, because when you're doing copy and paste, when you're doing formulae and so on, there is nothing to say that you have to restrict what you're putting into the formulae to the contents of the current workbook. You can use contents from other workbooks as well. Now doing that is outside the scope of this course. I'm not going to go into that now, but that's an important option for you to be aware of. Now the other thing to remember when you've got more than one workbook open is that some of the things we talked about earlier also become possible. So for instance, if I were to look at this Floors tab here, right click on it and then do Move or Copy, I can do a move of the selected sheets to book. I've now got a choice because I've got two books open. I could actually move that to the other book, or maybe make a copy to the other book. So the Floors tab will now appear in the other book. The original is still here, of course, because I've done a copy, but that's a great way of moving sheets between books that you're working on. And this can be particularly useful in situations like one where you've got a workbook that you're pretty happy with, so you've been using it on one project, and some of the sheets in it you think, great, I'm going to be able to use it on that other project. You may not want to copy the whole workbook, but there may be one or two very useful sheets, so that's a great way of doing that. So with two or more workbooks open, I can work on them independently, I can switch between them, I can transfer whole sheets of information between them, and I can access each other's sheets and cells, and formulae in one can reference cells in another. So there's a lot of flexibility. When you finish working with one of the workbooks, you just go into Backstage View as usual, click on Close, and I'm back at the Mileage Expenses workbook. Now that's got a worksheet that it didn't have before, the one I just copied, Floors. So if I right click on Delete, I get a warning that I can't undo deleting sheets, so if I delete this, it's gone forever. And there we are, I can carry on working on the Mileage Expenses worksheet, having closed the other one. Now there's just one more thing that I'd like to quickly look at in this section, and that's to do with the metadata about a workbook. Now we're going to look at this metadata in a different way and in a little bit more detail right towards the end of the course, but for the moment I want you to take a look at Backstage View, and in the info page here, that's the top page, you have some buttons on the left. We're going to be looking at these later on, things like protecting a workbook and inspecting a workbook. But on the right you see some properties, and the properties are basically the metadata. So you see the size of the workbook, its title, I can have tags, I can have categories, so I could add it to a category, and then I have dates like when it was last modified, when it was created, when it was last printed, and so on. I have an author's name, last modified by, etc. Now that's not the full set of properties. If you click at the bottom on Show All Properties, you get a list of all of the properties. And some of the properties are maintained for you by the system. So for instance, last modified, Windows looks after that for you. Whereas if you wanted to change the status, for instance you wanted to change the status of this to draft, you could just put the status in there. If you want to add a category, you could put it in there, and you can basically decide what sort of categories you want. So with some of these you can edit them and some of them you can't. And if you click on the Properties tab at the top, there are two other sets of options. Now one of the options is Show Document Panel, and if you've used Excel before you'll be familiar with this one, because if you select Show Document Panel, what happens is the panel with these properties appears at the top of the workbook. So perhaps if you can't quite remember what it's about, or you want an easy way of filling some of those properties in, you can use that approach. When you finish with the panel, click on Close and the panel disappears again. And finally, let me just go back into Backstage View again, go to that Properties button there with the drop down again. Advanced Properties gives us access to more document properties. Now these are arranged in a dialog with 5 tabs. We have some general information at the front, such as the location, the type, it's a Microsoft Excel worksheet, the size, some of that date information. We then have some summary statistics, including the title, the subject, the author, the manager, company, category, keywords, comments, etc. We have some statistics. We have information about the contents. This includes things like the names of the worksheets and any named ranges. I've got one here, rate per mile. You should have a similar one in yours. And then you can also define custom properties that you use for this as well. So that's the metadata about a workbook. Now if I go back to the summary there, you can see I've got title, subject, author, etc. What I would like you to do as a little exercise now is to take your equivalent of example 6, which is the mileage workbook, where you worked out the amount of the mileage claim, And I want you to basically add and change that summary information to put your name on it, to give it your own title. So a title like that isn't a particularly useful one. Why don't we call it something like that, and then put a description in there for the subject, put you in as the author, you can be the manager, put your own company or no company at all on there, and so on. So fill in some of those details and come up with your own version of this. I've already done it. Obviously I had a bit less to do than you because I've already got part of the information on there already, and it's saved as example 7. I'll see you in the next section.